This LSP model attempts to explain one of the failure modes as detailed in the National Risk Register of Civil Emergencies, namely space weather, something I'm personally interested in. Space weather, and in particular the coronal mass ejections that can cause huge magnetic fluxes that can knock out power grids, satellites, etc. Probably one of the biggest problems facing us after the advent of 5G and edge computing, where the Internet of Everything, rather than merely the Internet of Things, will begin to become commonplace, ubiquitous, and will form a major part of our life. What happens if such coronal mass ejection knocks out our infrastructure, our network of networks? What will we do? How will we get our food? How will we navigate? How will we have access to health? How will we survive, really? So this model attempts to take us some way to understanding the problem domain. Obviously, the sector that it sits within is really a national emergency sector, which is kind of a bit of a fudge because it's not a sector that's recognised on the stock markets, but it's within there. And obviously, it's usually dealt with by governments and then non-government organisations, international non-government organisations and charities quite often. You can see that the model follows the standard format. It's built in metaphor, but some of the metaphor is more complex than others. So by the very nature that we have civil emergency and civil defence ideas, we can see a citadel sat atop a tower. Citadel, the defensive militaristic ideal of that, something that is robust and able to repel marauders or invaders, even if those marauders take on an intangible form. We can see above that there's an antennae and a disembodied torso. That's really government attempting to communicate with us and attempting to communicate with the people, when often they have at least a dichotomy of purpose. We can see the head is down at the bottom and the legs are upside down on top of the ladder. There's also a whip attached there, not merely the three-line whip of politics, but also the bullwhip effect of overreacting to a change in need for resources. The citadel rotates to allow the direction to change so that we can point at different emergencies as and when, and the reason for the elevation is over the horizon gazing and the multiple eyes, which is bedecked by a crown, the idea of primacy and knowledge, knowing everything. Behind, and intentionally out of sight, is a cog, and that cog is the mechanism, often the invisible mechanism of what command and control looks like, especially at a governmental level. And there's a crash helmet and so on to show the hard-headedness and the shell-like nature of government. Then if we look down beneath, we can see various prongs descending, and that's them attempting to take the temperature of us, the proles, the people. But there's a groundswell and see from the bush, which is us growing, especially the new generation, growing in kindness, growing in interconnectedness, empathy, the idea of mental health, all of these things that are enriching us as human beings. And as we mentioned, the disembodied head, the red pipe coming out of that is the intelligence, the collective intelligence, the collective knowledge of the people and of government and of experts being espoused and being pushed out into the universe, and the wheel as a mechanism for propelling us forward, akin to the wheel on top of the tower. So hopefully when combined, we've got some locomotion. However, that's also tethered to the citadel, and that's because command and control contains control, and therefore you're not allowed to run away with your ideas. We're looking at it as an interplay with everything else that government is attempting to achieve. Next to the disembodied head is a sphere, and inside that sphere is the continuum of humanity attempting to prosper and move forward. There are translucent bricks at the bottom attempting to show a transparency of what we're attempting to achieve. A lot of this is attempt. We're in no way going to reach a utopia or an ideal, a panacea. The ladder is attempting to take us from the past through the present and into the future, and the multicoloured bricks underneath represent our strength as we're multicultural, as we allow for diversity and we celebrate what it means to be a human being and our place on this earth. The windmill in front, again, is providing a flow, a flux. We need to be in flux. The only change is constant. And the ladder, below the disembodied head, is to allow all comers to get aboard and sail with us. Then you'll see that there's a black disc protruding, almost like a springboard, from the main edifice. And this is looking into the red ocean, the ocean where everything already exists, and you're attempting to move amongst all of the pressures that are tugging and pulling at you. Think of COVID, think of the lockdown and the destruction of the economy, and then you have to open it up again, the death of people, and you're constantly being pulled from one place to another because there is no solution, and you're in quite literally a red ocean at this point. If we see the little figure with the baseball cap sailing through that ocean, they're the individuals, the innovators attempting to try and cleanse, try and make change. And the little disembodied head there, again, represents all of the people who wish to come with them. In the background then is the mechanised idea of what it means to be human, those rigid forms and the single jet engine that, if we're not careful, just send us in circles. And finally, on the far right of the model is the protrusion, that tentacular, insect, spider-like edifice connected via a single bar that's sat inside a blue ocean, looking for brand new sectors, brand new products, brand new services, and ultimately a brand new way to live. So whilst we're trying to analyse the space weather, understand when something may happen, and this is quite common, the sunspots appear, coronal mass ejections increase, solar flares, etc. We close our satellites, we turn them away, we shut down electricity grids, and we try and stop it having a negative impact when that wind, that solar wind, strikes the earth with such force. However, we've often thought of human beings and society in general of being a thin veneer. Think of the Purge, think of the Hunger Games, and how quickly the idea of being good to one another erodes. However, this is quite contentious, as the research suggests the opposite to be true. A great book is a new book called Humankind, as in kind humans, and it debunks an awful lot of the so-called research that went on before, the prison exercises, etc., that really were fabrications. Didn't really happen. Think of the power cuts in New York, the one in the 70s, the one in the 90s, and the difference in the way that the people reacted violently and insidiously in one, and as a community are coming together in the other. The only thing that had changed was the quality of the environment in which they existed. So it seems that if people are treated well, when crises arrive, they behave well. And we saw this a lot with COVID, the number of people giving lifts, cooking food, giving up things that they owned, and just generally looking out for one another, talking to your neighbours, riding your bicycle, preparing food, and making sure everybody was all right. Because if everybody isn't all right, you're not all right. If you're a believer as human beings, as a part of this biosphere, we are a part of nature, not apart from nature. So I've concentrated a lot there on the human element. But what I'm really looking for is, what does that have to do with space weather? Well, actually, the human element and society and that structure, that network of networks, is the very thing that it will attack. So what will we do without any navigation? Well, we could return to paper maps, but there's a 3-generational rule here. If your grandparents used maps, which of course they did, and they used them extensively, then they were able to pass that on to your parents. But if your parents used them sporadically and then moved on to GPS, their ability to use them isn't very adroit, very adaptive. However, when it comes to you, you will have never really engaged with one at all, except perhaps as out of idle interest. So it means that when your grandparents leave this earth, the ability to use paper maps is seriously reduced. When your parents leave this earth, the ability to use paper maps is erased. Now, obviously, since the advent of the printed word, we're able to capture knowledge and store it. But we will have to go back and relearn these things. Maps being a very simple one, cooking being another. Think of the slow food movement, the slow bicycle movement, minimalism, all of that. You're moving out of a consumerist culture that I was brought up in and that took primacy really in society during my lifetime. So the solar wind could come, a coronal mass ejection could hit us and knock out our grids, and we could actually discover an awful lot of what we've missed, not missed what we had already discovered. So think in your presentation about how you're going to analyse your model, how you're going to talk about your product or service, how you're going to explain your problem domain and the complexity of that problem domain. Because for me, the solution to this is the re-engineering of society. Keep paper records, keep paper maps, keep talking to other human beings, switch off social media and start to move backwards. Move into a time where looking at and being with human beings was important, not looking and being with a screen. Now, people say that regression, this retrograde idea, is always negative. I'm not sure that's true. And I would argue that human contact, human touch, the physicality to one another, our relationship with one another is paramount to our existence. So how do we prepare for solar flares? Is we make sure that we know how to do things without a computer, without a satellite, and with one another. I hope that goes some way to explain the model and explain what I'd like to see in your presentation. That is by no means exhaustive, and you can do much better. I want you to think about your market sector. I want you to think about innovation, and I want you to think about a solution. I don't want to give you a solution in this video because I don't want to colour one of yours. I want to say that the solution for this is no solution because we already have it, which is one another, which is paper, which is analogue. I'm sure you think of me as some old crusty when I say this. However, I've got a very strong argument that whilst computers answer many questions, they pose many more. And my concern when I look at your generation is how one moves away from this idea of self-worth that is devised and defined by a screen, by a click, by a scroll, and by an algorithm. Think about how you can attack thinking, what's known as a thought cage. Move yourself out of that thought cage and attempt to really sort of tread new ground, moving from that red ocean to the blue ocean. What would you do if you could do anything, if your model could achieve anything, and if people would help you achieve anything? Look at my video. Look at the fact you can see the window, you can see the windowsill, there's the end of the curtain, all of those sort of things. That's done on purpose. I'm not looking for you to have Hollywood movie production. I'm looking for you to give me an exciting narrative that tells me you've performed research. Make sure you cite people, cite work verbally as you're speaking, and put the reference on the screen. So I want to see some annotation. 5 to 10. 10 will get you the maximum marks. Make sure they're from journals, make sure they're from textbooks. Don't give me something from the BBC. And try and give me some depth. But think about your argument, think deeply about the problem domain, and try and help me to give you the best possible grade. As always, you know where I am, you know how to contact me, you know how to book a Teams meeting, you know how to book a group meeting, anything you like. Contact me, ask me a question, and let's get the best grade we possibly can.